Good day, this is my pilot video for this new channel. I've always been interested in the horror content and the horror genre. I've used it plenty of days myself as background noise to help fall asleep, etc. So I thought I'd give it a go for myself. I hope you will enjoy this channel and that this channel can keep growing. Thank you, and let's begin. Number 1. The following story was posted last month to the subreddit NOSLEEP. So, I don't know how long I have before I have to move again, but I'm being followed by a Skinwalker. It happened last week as I left the store and started my walk back to the house my friend had mentioned, an abandoned barn off the side of the road just over 2 miles from the store. I hadn't found what I needed at the store, so I figured I would stop by and check the place out. I wish I hadn't. When I arrived, I instantly had a creepy feeling about the place. It had glass windows, and I could barely make out the barn shape because of the amount of decomposition. I quickly found an entrance into the barn and began my descent into darkness. I pulled up the flashlight on my phone and moved swiftly through the main area of the barn. Surprisingly enough, the second floor was still intact. I located the ladder and climbed up to the second floor. The first thing I noticed was a hole in the wall to my right, just barely enough for me to fit through. I decided to check the hole first before moving through the rest of the second floor, and that's when I saw them. 2 red eyes stared at me from the darkness within the hole in the wall. I called out, "Who's there?" as I pulled my pocket knife out from my waist. The eyes got closer, and that's when I saw that it was my friend. "Kevin, what the hell, man? Why didn't you tell me you were here?" That's when my phone rang. I answered it, and it was Kevin's brother. "Hello," I said. "He's dead. Kevin is dead, and I don't know what happened." I was confused. Kevin was right next to me. How could he be dead? And that's when I saw Kevin's body drop lifelessly to the ground. The next thing I knew, somebody else was walking out of the hole. It was my brother this time. I called his phone but got no answer. I called my parents and got no answer. I called his girlfriend and she answered. "Hello?" I quickly asked her, "Where's Seth? Have you seen him?" She replied, crying, "He died a couple hours ago from a heart attack." That's when it spoke to me. "You shouldn't be here." I bolted down the ladder and took off towards my house, running as fast as I could. I found a dirt bike on the side of the road, and to my surprise, it started right up. I booked it to the house, and that's when I realized this thing was keeping pace with me on the bike. Its face looked like it was falling off, and it just looked at me with those 2 red eyes. When I finally arrived home, I slammed the door shut and locked it. I went into my room and locked the door. I could hear it scratching at my front door. I finally got some sleep, and when I woke up the next day, everything seemed fine, and for a second I thought I had dreamed it. That's until I opened the door, and engraved were the words, "You're next." Number 2. When I was around 13, my cousin and I decided we were going to go camping in our yard. We have a shared property that has been passed through the family for generations. There's about 150 yards or so between the houses, and it's just an open area of yard that hits our fields. The total land is around 2.5 square miles, so it's pretty big. We have fields, a creek, and even our own bit of forest. Anyways, I decided it was a nice summer night and we were going to go camping, so I grabbed the tent my parents had in the garage, and we spent the evening setting it up and going to his house for dinner. Around 9 p.m. we decided to go to sleep since it was getting pretty dark out there and it really wasn't much we could do outside while in the tent except talk about our plans for summer. At around 11 p.m. or so I got a call from my then girlfriend, and she was pretty upset about something that had happened earlier in the day. I was pretty tired, so it took me a while to actually understand what she was saying and for me to calm her down. But once I did, we continued to chat for a bit until my cousin grabbed my shoulder hard. I told him I was on the phone and he could wait, but he just pulled me around, and when I saw his face, I instantly told my girlfriend I had to go. He had his finger up to his mouth in a shushing motion, and he looked absolutely terrified. He told me to look towards the entrance of the tent in a whisper before I could even ask him what was wrong. When I looked, I didn't see anything at all, so I just told him to go back to sleep, but after that I heard a sound of someone walking around the tent. It seemed very unlikely that anyone would be out here unless it was my dad, and he isn't the type of person to prank anyone. We're generally pretty safe on the property as we're about 10 miles out of town, and everyone that lives us, our family or very old family friends. I told my cousin to be quiet and stay down, and I was going to see if I could find out what it was. But when I peeked out of the front of the tent, I didn't see anything again. I assumed whoever it was just ran off, or maybe it was my dad after all. But instead of pranking us, he just decided to come check on us. That was proven wrong, however, as I heard the footsteps walking around the tent again as soon as I laid down. It felt like hours. I listened to the footsteps. Sometimes it would change pace and rhythm, but after a while I heard them stop. I ended up looking at the entrance of the tent as I had a feeling of being watched and finally saw what freaked out my cousin so much. Standing there, peering into the tent, appeared to be a thin man who was very dirty and almost completely naked except for some animal skin. His eyes seemed to glow, only there was nothing that should have made them glow like that. I laid there frozen as we peered into each other's eyes for what seemed like a lifetime, but was probably only around 5 minutes. At this point, he very calmly, slowly backed away and turned around and ran off in the direction of our forest. I stayed awake, straining my ears for any sound indicating that he was coming back, but after about an hour and a half, I had exhausted myself and fell asleep. When we woke up, we immediately looked around the tent to see if maybe we were just seeing things, but sure enough, there were bare footprints circling the tent. While looking at the prints, I noticed that some of the tracks were coyote paw prints, which would have accounted for the change in rhythm. We ended up finding a set of tracks that led into our fields towards our forest, and noted that about halfway from the tent to the fields, the prints started changing from the bare footprints to the man on all fours with footprints and handprints, and slowly becoming smaller and turning into coyote's paw prints. And number 3. I've been dying to tell this story, though I know no one is bound to believe me. I don't even want to tell my parents in fear that they'll stare at me in disbelief and think that I'm crazy. So, here I am, anonymously telling a group of strangers in hopes that someone will believe me and give me some peace of mind. It started off a few months ago when we moved into our new home. I grew up in a rural community, but there were plenty of neighbors, mostly fields around, no woods. Given that I'm the youngest child, my parents waited until I was done with high school to move, as to not affect my already established life. Although we had lived in a small rural community, my parents were ready for something a little more secluded, something with a lot of acreage, woods, and a place to shoot. They put my childhood home up on the market and soon found their dream home, which is where I am currently and desperately writing this story. The house and the property are beautiful. It's a large turn-of-the-century house facing 15 acres of land, the majority of which are woods, and a nice half-acre pond. The best part, or so I thought, is that there are no neighbors within miles of us. At first, I really enjoyed it. Being out in the woods was very much a cathartic experience for me. It helped shed the stress of school and studying. Being among the tall trees and the surrounding nature made all of my problems seem totally insignificant, so I made a habit of going on regular walks through the woods. As the weeks went on, I started noticing strange things as I went on my walks. I would find partially eaten deer carcasses scattered along the leaf-littered ground, accompanied by a putrid rotting smell, which I attributed to the carcass in front of me. At first I thought nothing of it. That was probably the coyotes, I would tell myself. Other than that, I thought nothing of it, but I started carrying a gun with me on my walks in case I encountered the animal that was responsible for the carnage I saw in front of me. As the days went on, I started noticing more and more mutilated deer scattering across the floor of the woods, still accompanied by the rotting smell, which I again attributed to the animals. If the increasing number of mutilations weren't enough, I started to notice a change in the sounds coming out of the woods. What was once a variety of sounds was now mostly dead silence, minus the low, guttural growl that seemed to be becoming more prevalent, more pronounced, and more insidious each day. By this point I had stopped going on my little walks. Gun or no gun, I didn't want to risk the chances of facing whatever was causing these events. That being said, my curiosity eventually got the best of me one night as I heard its growls. I decided that I was going to get a trail cam and set it up in the woods the following day in hopes of finally seeing what was out there. The next evening, after work, I gathered up what little courage I had left and, camera in hand, went walking into the woods that I had promised myself I would stay out of. I never did get to set up the trail cam. I lost it somewhere in the woods while I was in a panic running for my life. I made it about 100 yards past a tree line into the woods where I decided to stop and set up the camera. I thought it was a good place to set it up, and quite frankly, I was too scared to go any further. After all, I wanted to spend as little time out there as possible, given the ongoing events, and the fact that it would be dark soon didn't help. Already on edge, every creak of the wood and every crunch of the leaves sent me into a panic. Rushing to set the camera up, I drop it, sending it into the leaf-ridden ground with a thud. Murmuring under my breath, cursing myself for being out there, I bent down to pick the camera up, when I started to smell the putrid smell of rotting flesh again. I carefully looked around, checking my surroundings to see if anything was out there. I could feel something watching me, but I couldn't see anything. Just as I finished picking my supplies up off the ground, I heard that low, guttural growl again, as well as the snap of a branch to my right. I quickly turned, seeing a human-like creature standing there, staring at me. I was completely frozen with fear. It had human features, standing on two legs, and it had feet and hands. The two things that threw me off, however, was the fact that its skin was charred black, as if it had been burnt in a fire, and most disturbingly, it had no upper or lower lips. Although mostly bald, a few thin straggling hairs stuck out every which way from its scalp. Its sharp teeth were hanging out like hypodermic needles. With an absence of lips, its raw red gums hung out in the open, thick strings of what appeared to be saliva dripping off of its chin. For one brief moment, the world around me seemed to stop. I quickly went through options on what to do. There were really only two viable options. Either stay exactly how I was and get attacked, and most likely killed by this thing, or I can get the fuck out of there. I chose the latter. I quickly scrambled to my feet and ran as fast as I could, throwing my camera in vain at the creature behind me. In the chaos of what just occurred, I found myself to be momentarily lost after running in what I thought was the right direction for what it felt to be about 20 minutes. I'm sure it was only 30 seconds, though. Looking around and not seeing the spawn of hell that I just encountered, I stopped to collect myself and try to find a way back to the house. I finally decided on the general direction in which I should head, when I heard a commotion that almost sounded like a horse pounding its hooves in the dirt. I looked behind me and saw that thing, whatever it was, running at me on all fours, mucus-like spit flying out of the corners of its mouth like a rabid dog. I ran as quickly as I possibly could without daring to look behind me. Although I would not look at it, I could hear it galloping behind me and smell its rotted flesh. Tears ran from my eyes as I thought there was no possible way to make it out of the woods alive, when I finally saw the light of my house out in the clearing. Using what little adrenaline I had left to sprint the last 200 yards or so to my back porch, I quickly opened the door and slammed it shut, not daring to look out the window. It's been about a month now since this happened. I haven't told anyone, and I will not dare to go back into the woods. I've been doing a lot of research to see if I could find any clues as to what that thing may be. I've exhausted myself, but I think I have come to a conclusion. The closest thing I could find was a Skinwalker. I know my sighting doesn't entirely match up with the stories I've heard, but it's the closest thing I've found so far.